Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and today we're going to replace the back glass on the iPhone XS. The front is cracked, but we're mainly going to focus on the back glass. So the tools you're going to need are going to be a P2 driver, a Y000 driver, a PH000 driver, a standoff driver, a razor blade, a pick, an Xacto knife like this, a prying tool like this, and a playing card. You'll also need some heat and some glue. And you'll also need some clamps for that glue. Lastly, you want some eye protection as well as some gloves for your hands, which all of this will be in the description below. So the first thing you want to do is obviously power off the phone if you can, but you also want to take the P2 driver and remove the bottom two screws. Next, you want to lift up the screen, which should be fairly easy to do. Focus on the bottom portion, then lift up the left side and the right side, and then it should pop up like this. In my situation, the screen has been removed before, but you want to cut through the adhesive and make sure the screen lifts up without cracking. Also make sure not to tear any of these cables on the right side and on the top side. Once the phone is open, you want to fold the screen over like this, and you want to remove these screws. There is one screw missing in my situation, but the other screws are still there. So you want to grab the Y000 bit and remove these 5 screws right here, and then you'll want to grab the PH000 bit and remove that one screw there, which again is not here. Then you want to take that panel, put it over to the side, and also make sure that all of these screws are in order. Next, we're going to unplug the battery, unplug the digitizer, and unplug the LCD, then carefully unplug the top flex cable. You also want to loosen up the flex cable from the Face ID area and make sure not to tear it. If you do tear it, Face ID will not work on your phone. Next thing we want to do is remove the SIM card, and we want to move this little thing over like this, so then it makes it a little bit easier for when we remove the logic board. Then you want to grab the PH000 bit and remove these 4 screws right here, again putting them in order, and then you want to grab the standoff bit to remove this one screw right here. Then we can start unplugging the cables and focus on taking out the logic board. So once these cables are all loose, we want to move the Face ID portion down a little bit, starting with this left side, and then it should kind of just fold over like this. There's going to be this metal piece that lifts over to the right. Remove that, and then there's going to be these 2 cables that need to be unplugged. They are a little bit difficult to unplug, so you could just take out the logic board and unplug them at that time, but you can still try and unplug them like this. Obviously, make sure not to tear these cables, but eventually they will loosen up. Next, we want to move all these cables out of the way and lift up the logic board. I recommend starting with the bottom and just kind of carefully moving away from all those cables. We can set that over to the side and then start removing these bottom screws with the PH000 bit to get the charging port out. So just remove all the screws you can see that are PH000 bits, and then remove all the screws you can see that are Y000 bits. Then we can unplug the speaker. Then we can remove this little antenna thing. It is a 2-piece piece, I guess you can call it, and set that off to the side. Next, you want to unplug the speaker, which I already did, and then you want to lift it up like this. Then we can unplug the Taptic engine and remove that as well. Then we can grab the standoff bit and remove all the standoff screws that we can see. There's this little cover over here, make sure to put that over to the side. And then we can grab the PH000 bit and remove these 2 screws right here. And that's pretty much it for the charging port, but first we need to get that battery out. So we're going to try and remove the battery by pulling these tabs, which could be a little bit difficult. Sometimes they come out and other times they don't. But either way, what you want to do is carefully try and remove those tabs and remove the glue under there. And it's pretty inevitable that some of those tabs are going to rip. If they do end up ripping, you can just add some heat to that area and kind of lift out the battery like this. Make sure not to bend the battery too much or at all, because it could cause some damage to the battery. But all you got to do is just add some heat and the battery should loosen up like this. Just make sure not to add too much heat. Not yet, at least. Now that we have the battery out, just remove all the excess adhesive that's on the actual frame itself and set that aside. Now grab the Y000 bit, remove these screws on the side because it's going to make it a lot easier for this little piece to come out, and then have the charging port come out as well. So we're going to move that thing off to the side. So pretty much what we want to do is move the antenna around a little bit to loosen up the charging port and just kind of lift up this area. But don't remove the charging port just yet, because there are 2 screws left that you need to remove with the PH000 driver. Loosen up the microphone over to the side and the charging port should kind of lift out. There are a few more screws left for this Wi-Fi area antenna, There's going to be Y000 Bit on the side, and then a PH000 Bit on the other side, and then it should just lift out like this. Next, the Face ID should kind of just lift out like this. The adhesive is kind of weak. And then we can grab the PH000 Bit and remove all these screws for this antenna. Make sure to obviously put them in the right area, as well as these Y000 screws. There are going to be some pieces like this. Just make sure you know exactly how they're going to be installed. Once all those screws are out, you're literally just going to lift up this side right here and carefully lift up this side as well. And it should just come out really easily. It should not tear. Next, you remove the camera cover like this, and the camera should just lift up over to the right. And what you want to do is set that down flat so that no dust gets in the camera. Then the next thing we're going to do is lift up this camera flash, and we're also going to lift up this microphone. One of the last things we want to do is remove the wireless charging, so you're going to have to lift up this little piece right here. So we're going to grab the PH000 Bit and start removing all the screws that we see, and then this last one right here is a Y000 Bit. Then what we're going to do is lift up this little piece right here, and carefully lift up the adhesive, making sure not to tear any of these cables. Feel free to add some heat if you need to. I personally don't like to. Then we're also going to take out the volume buttons and the ringer. Be very careful with the ringer, because if you mess that up, it may make the little piece shift a little bit, and it's going to be a pain to get that back in. Once you loosen up this cable from the frame, you have the wireless charging piece still on there, and all you're going to do is get a flat razor blade to kind of lift up that piece. Make sure not to bend the piece in half, because you can damage the wireless charging, but again, it's very difficult to do. Once you get to the wireless charging coil like this, you're just going to get a pick and cut through the rest of the adhesive, because that's definitely a safer bet. And once that's all loosened up, you can take that off and put it off to the side. Next, we're going to remove the camera flash, and we're going to remove this little microphone right here. The microphone ended up tearing for some reason. I don't know why. But either way, you want to remove it all in one piece. Don't fully remove it. What I recommend is just pushing it over to the side like this. And then what we're going to do is grab some capped on tape, something that's a little bit heat resistant, and put it over like this. Then we're going to fold that camera flash over it, so then when we do heat up the back, it doesn't melt that piece. So we're going to clean up the desk area, and in this situation, I'm going to use a back glass that goes over the camera, so it doesn't kind of go in. That way we can just remove the glass and set that on there, and everything's going to be good. So like I said, right now you need all your protective wear. So I recommend using the UV glove and just pretty much any protective glasses that cover up your eyes, because glass may fly up everywhere. Also, the UV glove is perfect for adding a lot of heat, and it kind of helps if your razor blade slips and you accidentally cut yourself. So what we're going to focus on is using a small razor blade on the edges to get started, and then using the Xacto knife for the rest of it pretty much. So what I like to do is try and get like a decent base heat around the whole entire phone. You know, just kind of heat up the area to kind of loosen up the glue just a little bit. Then we're going to focus on one area and get a razor blade and kind of lift up the glass. If it's really easy to lift up, you added a decent amount of heat, and that's pretty much the amount of heat that you want to keep using for the rest of the device. If there's not enough heat, feel free to add some more, but again, remember there is some plastic around here, and you don't want to melt that, and you can definitely smell when you do melt it. And you also want to be careful around the trim, because you don't obviously want to mess that up. But once we get a decent amount of space to get like this Xacto knife in there, we're just going to use this to carefully go under the glass after we heat it up a decent amount, and just lift up the glass like this. If it's in a large piece, you may have to kind of bend it a little bit and have the glass crack, but trust me, it's going to be easier to do that than trying to get it all in one piece. And I don't recommend using the Xacto knife on the edges, because it does make it a little bit easier to kind of damage that plastic frame on the outside, but if you're very careful, it's pretty easy to do. So what I recommend doing is starting at the bottom, but in this case I started at the top because there was a bunch of broken glass. So I'm pretty much just going to go and heat up these areas and focus on getting rid of the glass on the top, and then focus on getting rid of the glass on the bottom. Now we have it removed on the bottom and on the top, so we're going to focus on this little camera lens area, which may be a little bit difficult to remove, but I recommend kind of cracking it into sections so then you can kind of just take off that piece once you heat it up. But once everything is removed, you want to clean up the camera area especially. Make sure there's no glass under the camera and kind of clean up all the adhesive and all that good stuff. And now it looks fine. We're going to cut through the adhesive on the sides and kind of just make sure that it's flat, so then when we put the glass on, it has a flat area, so then we don't have to worry about it kind of lifting on one area and that's it. What I like to do is put it under the microscope and cut through all the adhesive that's on there, like the glue that they put on there. And I also want to make sure I don't cut that plastic trim, so this is why I do that. Obviously, you may or may not have this, but if you do, I recommend doing that if you want to make your job look perfect, or as close to perfect as you can. But once it's all cleaned up and it's all pretty flat, what we can do is we can remove this tape and kind of put this camera area back in place, at least with the microphone and the flash. Then we're also going to put the camera in there and make sure it looks clean, because at this point we want to make sure no extra dust gets in there. Then we're going to test out the back glass, make sure everything fits fine and looks good, and so far it looks good. And you can choose to do this or not, but what I like to do is I like to put the screen back on there so then it adds a little bit of support. And I'm going to tape the flexes to the screen so then it doesn't get stuck on the glue. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some glue around the edge like this, and I'm going to add some glue in the middle like this. And all we're going to do is just clean up the back, make sure everything looks nice, set the back on, apply some pressure to the corners, and apply some clamps. Then we're going to apply some clamps in the middle. Really, you only need like 3 or 4 in the middle, but I was going overboard at this time. But again, you only need 3 or 4. And then maybe 1 or 2 on the top and bottom portions. But ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit for about 2 to 3 hours. The longer the better. And then once we do that, we're going to remove all the clamps, clean up the desk area, and remove any excess glue if there is any. Then what we're going to do is we're going to start putting everything back together, which honestly you can kind of just speed through and do exactly what you did in the back. But what I recommend doing is starting with this little Wi-Fi antenna piece, kind of pushing that into place and putting all the screws that go into there. And then we're also going to put the charging port right here and apply those 2 screws on the bottom charging port to kind of hold that in place as well. Then we can line up this antenna on the top and put all those pieces back into place, obviously where they're supposed to go. You don't want to mess that up. Like I was saying, make sure all the little extra stuff that goes on these flex cables are in order. And once you get that back into place, we can continue on with the charging port. And then we can start putting in the wireless charging, along with those other buttons on the side. Now that we got most of the stuff on there, we can put the logic board back into place, and we can apply some of the screws that go into that logic board. Then you also want to plug in these cables and make sure everything lines up properly. If they're not lined up properly, you will have to remove the logic board and make sure that all the cables are lined up before you put anything back on. Once everything's good, you want to make sure these top 2 cables are plugged in, and you want to apply this little metal piece starting with the right side, and then it folds down, and then you want to add the standoff bit. Next, we can put the camera cover in like this. It kind of goes at an angle and fits into these little areas right here. Then we can put the PH000 Bit screws right here and the Y000 Bit on the top. We can also put this little cover off to the side, but if it doesn't stick, it's not really the end of the world. Next is this little Face ID, which kind of slides in on the right side, and then it slides up on the left side. And the best way to kind of tell is to kind of lift it up on the corner, and if it doesn't lift up, then it should be good. Then we can just plug in those cables, and at this point we might as well put in the SIM card tray. And then for the battery, we're going to put some adhesive on the top and on the bottom. and we're just going to set the battery in place, plugging it in to make sure that it is lined up properly. Once everything is lined up properly and it's in the phone, you want to unplug that battery and we can start lining up the screen. I am changing the screen, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the adhesive. I'm going to apply some new adhesive strips on the side, change the screen, removing the little top piece and putting it on the new phone. And then I'm going to plug in the screen on the top cable first, then plug in the LCD cable and the digitizer cable. Then I'm going to plug in the battery last. Then we're going to throw this cover over here, put in these 4 Y000 bit screws, and remember there is a PH000 bit that goes into this one area, but I don't have that screw. And we're going to fold the screen over and set it down. Then all you got to do is put the 2 bottom screws back in with the P2 driver, and you're pretty much done. So there might be some excess glue. That's pretty normal. All you got to do is just clean it up with like a fingernail, and everything should be good. Hopefully this video helped you out. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section or message me on Twitter at @MattofRWR. Subscribe to my channel so you can see more repair and some review videos, and hit that bell button so then YouTube reminds you when those videos do come out. Thanks for watching.